Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is I, yes. It's me, Brennon, here again with another episode of the Too Deep Coverage Podcast, 2DC, in the library, the place to be. Just getting back this week from Los Angeles. It is Friday, August 23rd, 2024. Recording a little late and recapping the week 2 games and events. Just got a lot going on with going back to school. I'm in grad school now, so congrats to me and RIP to me as well, because I know that's going to be a journey. Also working full time and just navigating other things with my schedule. Didn't leave a lot of room to get here to the bar branch of the St. Louis Public Library to get this recording in. But I'm here. Got the recording going. It looks like the levels are good. I got my stats. I got my notes. And we're going to knock this episode out. Later in the week, so some developments have taken place that I'm going to cover next week on the week 3 preseason wrap-up. Most notably, I'll just go ahead and touch on it now, the Jahan Dotson trade to the Philadelphia Eagles from the Washington Commanders. I believe the Eagles gave a 3rd-round pick next year and then like a 7th-round pick the following year, something to that effect. A steal to me for what Jahan Dotson's worth and value is. And I actually had notes on this previous preseason game about how well Luke McCaffrey did, possibly well enough to have solidified that wide receiver 2 job. And lo and behold, this trade took place. So only thing I wanted to really touch on as far as the week after the week 2 games. But let's get into these game recaps. I just wanted to provide some of the notes that I had from all the games. I watched pretty much all of them, the condensed replay. Shout out to NFL Plus, a beautiful service, providing all 22. We're going to definitely try to get that incorporated in future episodes so we have some visual to go with this audio. But I watched the Eagles-Pats game. It was pretty uneventful, being that the Eagles did not play any of their starters. Get situated here. The Pats did play their starters, and it's difficult to say Jacoby Brissett is a starter. Not to be disrespectful to Jacoby Brissett, but I never really viewed him as a starter, even though he has the title and he has the backing of head coach Gerard Mayo, which I think Gerard Mayo may have played. Was Gerard Mayo playing when Jacoby Brissett was in the league? I don't remember if they were in the league simultaneously, but I think the vote of confidence is, a good thing, obviously, with whatever quarterback you trot out there as a QB1. But everybody knows, including Brissett, which he's spoken to very publicly, that Drake May will soon take the job. It's just a matter of when, and it's probably going to be sometime this season. However, what I saw in this game didn't show any promise that that's going to be soon. And it's not like Jacoby Brissett really fought Drake May off for that effort, but he didn't really Drake May didn't really prove anything himself. He didn't show anything noteworthy to me. And there have been some pundits I've seen reviewing his play, and they were like, oh, he looked promising and it looked encouraging. I'm like, maybe I just didn't see it. The starting offense was pretty stagnant, as I mentioned. There was no explosive plays. Jacoby Brissett didn't do anything noteworthy, and that's pretty much indicative of his career. He's been a solid bridge or backup quarterback throughout his career, even when he has been the primary starter. He makes the play that he needs to make, but he doesn't make the play, if that makes sense. He makes the play he needs to make, but not the play. That's what I mean to say, how I mean to invoke that. Drake May, on the other hand, he did have 2 scoring drives against the Eagles backups. The latter was a scrambling touchdown. I think it was like 4 yards inside the goal to go, range. And he did have some excitement, particularly when he was targeting Javon Baker out of UCF. I think that's one of the biggest sleepers in the entire NFL from the film that I saw during his college time at UCF, as well as what I've seen in the preseason. Even though it's been primarily against backup defensive backs, he's shown a lot of promise with getting separation, his route running, and he just has like that freaky kind of twitch that you can't teach. Somewhat similar to, and I'm not saying he's like this, but it's similar to Brandon Lloyd. If you don't know who Brandon Lloyd is, probably has one of the best wide receiver highlight tapes ever in terms of just acrobatic catches and body control. Javon Baker is very similar to that in how he moves, his movement pattern, his aesthetic. And he couldn't connect with May on any of those big plays, but he had like 2 or 3 of those opportunities that was like, oh. It was like, whoa. It just kind of caught you off guard if you weren't paying attention. So I'm interested to see how he gets incorporated into the offense into the regular season. Everyone's talked about Jalen Polk, particularly people in fantasy circles. Obviously, Kendrick Bourne is still the starter. Everybody seems to have forgotten about Pop Douglas. There's a lot of receivers with potential, none too proven outside of Bourne. We'll see how the final roster shakes out, the final 53, and who will start getting that first team run in the first few weeks. The defense looked like it needed a reset. Matthew Judon got shipped off to Atlanta, and there's no real identity or real follow-up person in terms of leadership or like, okay, they're the guy. There's still some talent on that roster with Kyle Duggar, Christian Gonzalez. But the only person that really seemed to step up so far that I've seen with my eyes was Keion White. He had a really good game. One that didn't show up too much on the stat sheet, but he did get a sack. He was dominating the Eagles' offensive line, which, again, it was the Eagles' backups. But when you go against the backups, you should dominate if you're a great player, and that's what he did. So I mentioned Christian Gonzalez. He looks back to form after he missed time last season for injury. He looks like he's back on point. I'm going to try to scroll up here if I can get my laptop keyboard to work. It's about time to replace this thing. I have I think it's a Surface Pro 3 from 2015, 2016, something like that. It's been holding on. At least replace the type cover if I don't replace the whole thing. Probably need to replace the whole thing, but it's been good to me, so I'm going to try to be good to it. What else did I notice from that game? The Eagles didn't really have anything noteworthy. Again, it was all backups. Kenny Pickett was the starter for the game. He didn't look too confident. He took 4 sacks. He seemed like he was slow processing, very similar to another quarterback I'm going to touch on later, and Zach Wilson. High drafted quarterbacks, first-round picks, who are getting second opportunities in different locations, and both looked very uncertain. I said broken for Zach Wilson. It looked a little worse, but both of them just looked like that confidence that they may have had in college, which I don't even, from their college tape, I don't know if they even had the confidence or if they were just that good in comparison to their peers. Zach Wilson in BYU, which is, I don't know what conference they were in because all of this conference realignment, and then Kenny Pickett in the ACC with Pitt. The level of competition might not have been enough, the defenses they were going against, to prepare them properly for what they're seeing in the NFL. And I think it's showing now that they're in different locations and still struggling against second-team talent in the preseason. So, yeah, Pickett had 11 completions, which was noteworthy. He didn't have a lot of incompletions. But, again, 4 sacks. He only had 67 yards with 11 completions. So it wasn't like he was really pushing the ball down the field. Falcons and the Ravens. We learned last weekend that Kirk Cousins isn't going to play in the preseason. I think they had held out hope for that, which is why it was such a late report in the preseason, something that could have been reported before week 1 of the preseason if they knew that that was the plan. But it's kind of showing that they didn't expect the delays or the lack of preparedness that they've been experiencing with him in that recovery. But all signs are still pointing to him being ready for week 1 of the regular season. And they keep saying it. They keep putting it out there. So we'll see. If all else fails, even if he misses week 1 or week 2 of the regular season, if they get him for the bulk of 17 games, they have an opportunity to go to the playoffs with that roster. And if he's truly healthy and confident in planting on that back foot, driving through, and being able to hold up for the majority of the season, they'll be able to go to the playoffs. So better safe than sorry. I'm not too worried about what they provide to the media. I'm more worried about, is he really ready? Is he really healthy? And if not, they've got the other guy, Michael Penix, who also sat out that week. They said that week 1, he looked confident enough. The quote here that I have from the head coach, Raheem Morris, was that he looked well enough in week 1, quote, that we don't have to play him in the preseason. Okay. You traded up to draft him. He gave you a good enough impression week 1 of the preseason. Okay. Take your word for it. I know what I saw when I watched him at Washington, so I have no reason to doubt what they're saying. And that week 1 preseason game, he looked pretty good as well. On the other side for the Baltimore Ravens, journeyman Josh Johnson. I just like the ring of that. Journeyman Josh Johnson. It's a tongue twister. He didn't miss a throw. He went 11 for 11. Ended up adding a touchdown on to that as he started instead of Lamar Jackson for that game. The other thing that was really noteworthy league-wide this week 2 of the preseason was Justin Tucker with the kickoff. Everybody's been talking about the dynamic kickoff. I guess that's the term they want to use now from the XFL 2.0. Was it 2.0 or 3.0? I think it was 3.0. 2022. Justin Tucker attempted a pooch kick. So he essentially tried to get it into the landing zone without driving it straight. He kind of tried to pop it into the front part of the landing zone, and it fell short. I'm assuming that's what he tried to do. I don't know what his intent was, but it looked like he just shanked it, and it barely got to the back of his kickoff unit, and it was a flag. So I think they brought it out to the 30 or maybe the 40. I think it was the 30. But it just showed that with one of the best special teams units in the NFL, best special teams coach in the NFL, and John Harbaugh, that they are considering and trying different ways to juice up that kickoff and use it to their advantage, especially with the new format. Trenton Simpson, noteworthy linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens, replacing Patrick Queen. He had a very impressive preseason game to back up his week 1 game. Very efficient movement laterally, very quick diagnosing of plays. He didn't look like there was going to be a big step off the cliff from Patrick Queen leaving. And as I've been saying, backup competition, second, third teams, guys that may not make rosters, it's easy to look like that guy when you're not facing, the best of the best. But when you're going against the backups, you should look like that guy. So it gives some encouragement that it can translate when you are going against the best of the best. Or at the very least, it gives you some confidence. So he'll be starting alongside Roquan Smith week 1 of the regular season. Definitely a player to keep your eye on for the Ravens and that defense to help replace some guys that left. The Bengals and the Bears. Again, backup competition for the Bengals, but Caleb Williams continued to look impressive as he acclimates to the NFL. He didn't have the same flashy, splashy game that he had week 1, only 6 of 13 for 75 yards. He did scramble for a 7-yard touchdown, but didn't put the ball in harm's way. Finished drives with scores, and he gave the offense the juice that they've long been needing from the quarterback position. Has a very, very good opportunity to be the best quarterback that the Bears have ever had. Easily. It's not anybody that's like holding on tightly to that mantle. And he's coming out the gate with the supporting cast that he has, showing that potential to be that guy. Tyson Bagent also looked good in backup. When he came in, he was 7 of 8 for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns, and looked to be a very competent backup if anything were to happen to Caleb Williams. Let me see. There was no real noise or anything noteworthy from the Bengals side. Shout out to Hakeem Baker formerly from the St. Louis Battlehawks. He did get a target, but he's only a whisper on the depth chart right now, unfortunately. They do have a nice crew of receivers over there in Cincinnati, but he's not getting an opportunity to get any backup run. Really, he's only had 3 targets all preseason, 1 catch. So we'll see if he hangs on to the final 53 or if he makes a return to the UFL. I know as a St. Louisan, we'd love to have him back because he's been dominant. He was dominant during his spring stretch of ball. So the library folk are telling me I got 15 minutes. I'm going to get the rest of these games recapped in this 15 minutes, get this joint saved and edited, and we're going to upload it, and we're going to get on to the next episode. Giants versus Texans. Both teams did play their starters. Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones, did not look good. His first game back of any kind from his ACL injury last season, and the first throw that he made, he almost threw a pick to Derek Stingley for the Houston Texans. And then later on in the game, in the first half, because he did play 3 quarters, which was crazy. It just shows how bad that offense is going to be. He did actually throw a pick to Jalen Petrie, and it was a pick 6 that happened on the next drive. And Derek Stingley said, you know what? I dropped my first one. I see Petrie got one. Let me go ahead and get mine. Let me get my get back, which Derek Stingley did. He did actually end up getting a pick later on in the second quarter. So Daniel Jones threw 2 of those interceptions, 1 pick 6, looked rusty throughout the first quarter, had 1 great pass in the second quarter against the Texans' backup DBs, but looked completely overwhelmed. Now, to be fair, Houston's defense was really good last year, and they've improved, especially with the addition of Danielle Hunter, but that defensive backfield is nasty. You got Jalen Petrie, Jimmy Ward's coming back from injury. He's been all over the league, good wherever he's been. Derek Stingley, as I mentioned, first rounder. Now you add Kamari Lassiter to be on the other side, first round caliber corner, or first round corner. That's what he was. First round pedigree is what I mean to say. And then Desmond King Jr. in the slot, or Desmond King the second, to be respectful. So all 5 of those guys are dynamic, explosive, playmaking defensive backs. To go with the linebackers that they added, you've got a linebacker as a head coach. He had that defense well last year, and I'm sure they've only improved. So it wasn't the best opportunity to go against the Texans' starting defense in your first game back from injury, and you already had struggles in the league. I want to give Daniel Jones a little bit of a bone, but it looked bad. It looked really bad. And it was kind of embarrassing, too, being that you shipped Saquon off to keep this guy. And they're probably going to be in a running for the number 1 overall pick next year. Malik Neighbors looked good. His athleticism was definitely on display. He had a jumping sideline toe tap catch that he made down the right sideline near the end of the second quarter. And then Jalen Hyatt was like, okay, bet. Let me one-up you on that. He had a spinning one-handed back shoulder catch that he tried to make. It was out of bounds, but it was a good effort. So the receivers trying to help Daniel out, but it's really going to come down to they're going to need to replace that quarterback next year. The defense didn't do much. Nothing from Kayvon Thibodeau and company, Brian Burns. Texans just marched down the field, did whatever they wanted. C.J. Stroud was hitting all of his weapons, getting everybody involved early. They did have a turnover on downs at the goal to go, so they didn't get any points. But the drive itself was more so what they were concerned about. Could they do what they wanted to do? And the answer was yes. So that was that. Lions and the Chiefs. It wasn't much there. I know everybody talked about the behind the back catch or the behind the back pass from Mahomes. Just showing, okay, the ceiling that y'all thought I was at, I'm going to go past that. It was kind of like a shovel pass setup to the play, but instead of shoveling the ball, he just decided to flick it behind his back to Kelsey. Looked cool. It looked cool. Highly impressive for sure. But it looked cool. But nothing much else from the game. He did have 15 attempts on 2 drives. Mahomes did. And he was definitely targeting Rashee Rice heavy. I don't know if he was trying to make a statement with that, but outside of that, there wasn't much from this game. The Lions set their starters, so I didn't really take too many notes there. Matt Ariza, it's encouraging to see him back with the opportunity, getting some reps after the controversy that he had where his career was basically almost over. Had 2 60-plus yard punts in the second quarter, 62 yards and 61 yards. And then he had another punt in the third quarter where he pinned the Lions inside the 20. So he was definitely highly touted for his leg, and now he's getting an opportunity to put it on display in the preseason. Vikings and the Browns both set their starters. It was interesting to see that N'Keal Harry was still in the league, which is just amazing. He was still in the league when Brady was with the Patriots, not doing much of anything. Now he's trying to make the Vikings as a tight end, and it's probably not going to go too well because he dropped his only pass. So I said there needs to be a law firm called Claypool, Chosen, and Harry. So Chase Claypool, Robbie Chosen, and N'Keal Harry are finding ways to hang out in the league that astound me. Throw Laquan Treadwell in there too, because I saw he had like 7 catches for some team that he's on. But nevertheless, Deontay Foreman looked healthy. He knocked the touchdown in at the goal line in front of the dog pound, celebrated. Everybody gave him a warm reception. It seems like all is well after that scary accident he had in practice a couple weeks ago. And he's wearing number 27, which I thought that was very eerie and is similar to the Kareem Hunt. He looks very similar how he runs and the style he runs with the dreads as well, like Kareem Hunt. So maybe that was the role that they brought him in to play. Let me see. DTR looked decent. Dorian Thompson-Robinson in backup. I hope that they don't have to lean on him as a starter again. But they're sitting Deshaun Watson out, so they must be confident in what they're seeing in practice that he's going to make that pan out in the regular season. I didn't take any notes on the Jets, the Panthers, or the Cardinals and the Colts. All starters sitting. So not much to speak on there. We've got the Commanders and the Dolphins. Chop Robinson looked really good. He flashed on a tackle for loss, kind of gave the right tackle a crossover move inside, and he smoked the running back. He just ran through him, knocked him out. Not knocked him out, but And Mo Kamara, who was from Colorado, if you remember the Colorado State game, he was really disruptive in that game against Shedeur Sanders and company. He ended up getting a sack off the blind side on that same drive of Chop Robinson. So it was interesting to see his flash and what he'll be able to do this year if Jalen Phillips isn't fully healthy in time, or if he doesn't get healthy enough. You got a rookie there that has some potential. And then on the other side, I mentioned Jahan Dotson, his impending departure. I think that deal was already in place, and they were just trying to see if he was going to confirm it. And it seems like Luke McCaffrey confirmed it for him because he had a couple of big catches across the middle of the field. He had one dig route, and he had another route that he caught in traffic against contact and looked really confident to be stepping into that role. So bye-bye Jahan. Now he's going to be the number 3 guy in Philly. I don't know if that's what he wanted, but it is what it is. The Bills versus the Steelers. The Steelers offense looked terrible. Russell Wilson had that nagging calf injury. He finally got to start a game after putting that to rest, and it just didn't go well. The O-line didn't look good, so to be fair, he didn't have a lot of time to process and work through his reads and develop his game and get into a rhythm. But, man, it was just, it looked bad all the way around. I don't think the receivers got any separation, which I was very heavy on when it came to George Pickens. But now we're starting to get to see it in live action. All right, guys, we're back here at the Julia Davis branch of the St. Louis Public Library. I'm actually wrapping up the episode here a day later. I ended up running out of time on the previous recording session. Ended kind of prematurely because of the library closing earlier than I anticipated. So I'm going to knock out the second half of the episode in the location. If you notice, different attire, different background. That's where that comes from. I was talking about the Bills and Steelers game and just some of the reviews of that. I had gotten to pretty deep into it, but I'm just going to start over fresh. Russell Wilson had a nagging calf injury. He had kind of gotten back into the swing of practice, but they were still limiting him a little bit. Decided to throw him out there in a preseason game, which they didn't really have much of a choice. It wasn't like he was coming over with his 2014, 2015 accolades or even his 2017, 2018 accolades where he was playing top 10, top 5 quality ball. He's coming off of a pretty mediocre 2023 season with the Broncos, despite the lack of help from Sean Payton. Still played pretty well considering the circumstances, having a coach that didn't really want you there. But he hadn't performed to the standard that suggested he shouldn't play any preseason games, which there are some other quarterbacks that haven't played preseason that I wonder the same, like Deshaun Watson, Gardner Minshew as recent as last night, because this is being recorded on Saturday, August 24th, 2024. I will touch on week 3 again in the following episode. But there are certain quarterbacks that are like, no, you should be playing every week of preseason. You should at least get one series, if not 2, against live competition in a live game setting, live bullets. I know the joint practices are taking over the league standards, and preseason games don't have as much merit to a lot of franchises, but there's something different about being under those lights with fans in the stands and having to perform in that kind of environment and atmosphere versus behind closed doors, relatively speaking, in a much more controlled environment. That's just me personally. So it was good to see Russell Wilson out there. It was not good to see how he performed. The whole Steelers offense looked pretty bad. The offensive line could not get any push or protection in pass pro. Couldn't open up any holes for Najee or Jaylen Warren, who ended up departing the game due to injury, hamstring, unfortunately. And the Steelers receivers couldn't get any separation, which I wasn't surprised as much about that as I was Russell Wilson being able to navigate. I don't know, prisoner of the moment or prisoner of the past, I don't know. I fully expected him to be able to be somewhat like Seahawks Russ because of being in a comfortable environment with a coach that wanted him, having some personnel that supported his style of play, and a head coach or offensive coordinator, rather, that acclimated to the running quarterback style of play. But noticeably less athleticism, noticeably less or slower processing, maybe because his receivers weren't getting open. I haven't checked out the all 22 on that yet. And he just didn't have time to throw the ball. The offensive line was getting destroyed. I know some of them have been injured throughout training camp, but nevertheless, the whole show for the Steelers starting offense was depressing and very gloomy for the upcoming regular season. Justin Fields, he looked much more dynamic, stepping in for Russ after a couple of drives, but it wasn't like he was much more accurate, and he had to do a lot more running because, again, the offensive line was doing him no favors. So we got to see that dynamic playmaking ability on display, getting out of the pocket, picking up first downs on his own, making plays when there are no plays. But it's almost like, I forget the phrase, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's pretty much like the same guy, just one is younger and more mobile than the other. It still has a lot of is left to be desired with his accuracy and his processing as well. So I look forward to checking out that All-22 and seeing just how those receivers were doing for Russ and for Justin Fields as far as getting open and allowing them to have somebody to make plays with, or if the quarterbacks were out there solo. Peyton Wilson, who I was very high on at linebacker, the rookie from North Carolina State, he ended up getting an injury. It hadn't been diagnosed as of the time of this recording or prior to this recording. I hadn't looked any further into it, but it looked like a concussion by his movement patterns. He seemed a little wobbly. His legs seemed shaky. But he also was kind of favoring his leg. Maybe it was both. No telling. I'll get more clarity on that in the next episode. And that was it for the Steelers. I mean, the starters played for both teams. It wasn't an impressive showing either way. The only guys that didn't play, I would say, because the weather was kind of shaky before the game, so it seems that some of the starters that were set to play were last-minute scratches. All of a sudden, they were kind of gimpy, or they tweaked this, or the injuries that were last minute just happened to pop up. And I think it was because of the weather prior to the game being shaky and leaving the field conditions less than ideal. So Josh Allen was a last-minute scratch for that game. He was set to start, but at the last minute, Mitch Trubisky ended up starting. And when he did step on the field and start in Pittsburgh, he got a standing ovation. I'm lying. He got booed tremendously. I'm not sure why the Steelers fans are holding on so tightly to his contributions or lack thereof to the Steelers franchise. He wasn't a guy that they drafted. He didn't bad talk the city. Mitch Trubisky really hasn't done anything to anybody except try to be a good quarterback. And yet he's reviled in two locations now, Pittsburgh and Chicago. But he ended up getting the start. And also T.J. Watt decided to sit out on the Steelers side. So that was something I was looking forward to from fantasy perspective, as well as just being a fan of his game. I was fully ready to see him get some action in, kind of get his feet wet, but I guess the joint practices, again, have been enough for him, which he is a proven enough player to where he doesn't need to play, just like Josh Allen. But he ended up sitting out too. Ray Davis was probably the most impressive Bills player I watched. Very bruising, powerful runner, downhill, more shifty than I expected. He's not the biggest guy, but he is solidly built, so I thought he would be much more just power, straight line, but he had some shiftiness and some quickness to his game, and he had some impressive runs. But there was no real run for Keon Coleman. That was what kind of frustrated me. Florida State fan I am. Watched all of his games in college. I thought that his skill set would translate. He wasn't the biggest route runner or separator. At this point, he's pretty much in the George Pickens camp. Just contested catch guy, big play, go up and get the ball kind of receiver. But I didn't see him get no opportunities for the second week in a row. So I think he had maybe one target. I'm not really sure off the top of my head. I think he had one target, which is not good for your first-round pick that you're anticipating could possibly be your number one receiver throughout the course of the season. For him to not really get any work, and we're talking about joint practices again versus preseason games. If anybody needs the preseason games, it's a rookie. Because, again, the joint practices, controlled setting, not in a stadium environment, you don't have the fans on the top of you, the lights shining brightly, and all of the hoopla that supports a actual game versus a practice where it's pretty much ground level for everybody and not much media attention, so on and so forth. So I would think they'd get him more involved in these preseason games, trying to get him more targets, but it doesn't seem to be the case. He had 3 targets in the game, 1 catch for 12 yards. And I just don't think that's enough. I mean, he the second most targets out of the receivers, to be fair, which for a whole game was only 18 pass attempts. Oh, yeah, they were trying to get the hell out of there. The Bills had 34 rushing attempts and 18 pass attempts total. So they only threw the ball 18 times. That's interesting for the Bills. I mean, Josh Allen is the one-man band, essentially, for the team when they start, but you got a brand-new receiving core, and you only got 18 targets for that receiving core, and only 3 of them went to your supposedly de facto number 1 receiver. Let's say Khalil Shakir is truly the number 1 receiver. He only got 1 target. So, I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting with that AFC East and the Jets getting better on paper, the Dolphins getting better on paper, the Patriots starting to rebuild and recover from the end of the Belichick era. The Bills did not get better if you don't trust Keon Coleman to get more than 3 targets or 1 catch in a preseason game. It's not encouraging enough for a first-round rookie who is replacing essentially Stephon Diggs. That's going to be very shaky going into the regular season. Seahawks-Titans. Both sat their starters. Sam Howell, he looked confident in the first half. He didn't put the ball in harm's way. I rocked with him during his time in Washington. He was my fantasy starter. I actually traded to get him at the beginning of last season out of my fantasy draft. I was very high on him, very confident in him. The reports in camp were surprisingly favorable for his skill, and he was pretty highly touted coming out of UNC. He had a lot of turnovers last season, fumbles and interceptions, mostly in a few games, but at critical moments. And before I knew it, I lost track of how bad the record was for Washington because the games were so competitive. He would play well enough to where the games would be competitive and he'd get all of his receivers involved, but critical mistakes at critical junctures led to him getting replaced by Jaden Daniels and now being a backup in Seattle. So watching this game, it was good and it was encouraging to see that he didn't put the ball in harm's way intentionally or by his own doing. I won't say intentionally. He did end up having a fumble that was recovered by the Seahawks, and he got sacked twice, but he went 11 for 14, 153 yards and a touchdown. That sounds like a solid half, and I think he only did that in maybe 4 drives. So very, very good for him. Encouraging as well as a backup for Geno Smith because there have been some rumblings about Geno and whether or not the contract he earned was mistakenly given based off of pretty much 1 year of high-level production and then last year being somewhat of a regression. It's going to be difficult for the season he had in 22 to be replicated in 23, but nevertheless, Sam Howell started last season, backup for Geno and providing a push and some gentle encouragement for him to level back up with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba in tow. He's got plenty of weapons, plenty of options, and I'm pretty sure the staff there, especially with a new head coach and Mike McDonald, they'll be happy to say, hey, you know, if it doesn't work out for Geno, if he's shaky, poor play, injured, whatever the case may be, if he can't show up the way we need him to, we have a competent starter in Sam Howell who can at least keep us competitive. I would say more support for Sam Howell in Seattle than what he had in Washington. Better receiving core, better running back room. I was never high on Antonio Gibson versus Zach Charbonnet as a backup to Kenneth Walker. So that was my thoughts on him. Tyrese Knight, I believe from UCF, the linebacker, the rookie linebacker, who has an opportunity to start instead of Jerome Baker or Tyrell Dotson, whoever underperforms more. UTEP, excuse me. I knew it was something. UTEP, Texas El Paso. He looked really good. And Jerome Baker being injured with a hamstring injury, we know how those can linger. Those soft tissue injuries can be impactful over time. And Tyrell Dotson coming from the Bills, having a good season instead of Matt Milano, but not enough to where it was going to be a reason to usher him out the door or into an early retirement. And now Matt Milano's hurt again, which is unfortunate. But both of those guys coming from situations where they're not locked in starters. They're kind of fill-ins until the Seahawks can find something a little bit more reliable. This might be the guy that's reliable. And he's more of a run stuffer. He's got to improve a lot in coverage. He's not the most mobile and flexible linebacker. He's more side-to-side, lateral, downhill, reading, run. But he looked decent in coverage. Stuff that couldn't show up on the stat sheet. And I have a belief that with him being drafted by this regime, the intention is to replace those linebackers that came in free agency sooner than later. So it's all going to be a matter of, can Jerome Baker get healthy? Can Tyrell Dotson perform up to the standard he showed last season, filling in for the Bills? If they continue to play well, Tyrese will sit. He didn't get drafted that high, a fourth round, to where he needs to get on the field by the end of the season. But he's definitely earned that opportunity by how he's played in the preseason. I want to say he had 8 tackles, if I'm not mistaken. He had 8 tackles. Another guy that they drafted, Byron Murphy, out of Washington, defensive tackle. He's going to be a monster. Now, defensive tackles have not been getting the due that they deserve. I mean, linemen in general, outside of pass rushers. Offensive linemen and defensive linemen don't really get the credit they deserve. If you don't build your team through the trenches, it's going to crumble. It's like building a house on sand. You got to have a solid foundation to build on when you're constructing a franchise, and if you don't build it on your linemen, you can have the best defensive backs, you can have the best receivers, the best quarterbacks, but you won't have adequate protection, and on the defensive side, you won't have adequate protection or adequate stalwarts to stop whatever attack that the offense is trying to do. You won't have guys that can get to the quarterback on the edge or through the middle, and you won't have guys in the interior that can help stop that run and plug up those gaps. So Byron Murphy, he's looking to be one of those guys, a Quinnen Williams, Christian Wilkins type of guy. He's been very disruptive in the preseason. Again, in ways that can't necessarily show up on the stat sheet. It's not like pass breakups or quarterback hits, but it's literally, and they might need to make this a stat and figure out a more PC name for it, but the F up the play type of guy, where I'm just swimming through my guard, I'm plugging up 2 gaps, and I'm just messing the play up before it gets started, and now whatever the script was for the offense, they have to pivot. And now the edge rusher comes in and finishes the sack, or now the linebacker on the blitz or the defensive backs can catch up in coverage if maybe the receiver got open but not enough separation to where the DB couldn't close that gap with some additional time. That all starts in that defensive tackle spot when you have that guy that can play the nose or play the 3 technique and really get back there and mess things up. And he's been doing that. And it's been pleasing Mike McDonald. Again, you want the guys that you draft to play well. It's not that you don't want the free agents or the guys from a previous regime to play well, but you invested time and effort and energy into researching that guy that you brought in through the draft. And most franchises that are wise, they're going to be more committed to those guys than guys that came from the outside. Malik Willis on the other side is battling with Mason Rudolph for that backup quarterback position for the Titans. neither one was too, I want to say wowy. That's like a very, very immature word. They neither one of them did anything spectacular or anything that jumped off the screen, but they were both very efficient. Malik Willis didn't get in the end zone. He didn't finish any drives with touchdowns. Mason Rudolph got one. Malik Willis threw a pick. Mason Rudolph didn't. I don't really think Malik Willis got supported enough in this league from his time as a rookie out of Liberty because he just went to the wrong situation. Now, he is a running quarterback. That was his strength. He could throw the ball with some really good arm power, but he wasn't necessarily known for his accuracy at Liberty. He was just known for being a big play guy that could run. So to get drafted to the Titans when Mike Vrabel's still there and Ryan Tannehill's still there and Derrick Henry is still there wasn't the best environment for quarterback development. He could have definitely been something special with Derrick Henry for an offensive coordinator that could figure out how to make them work together, but that just didn't transpire. And then you go to an offensive head coach who wants an actual quarterback that's more polished, or at least that could work. He could work a little bit more with, and they end up drafting Will Levis. So I don't think Malik Willis is going to stick around much longer with the Titans, and I really don't know where else he could go that has a coach that trusts him or, believes in him to where they would work with him and bring him along. So he might be one of those guys that you heard about during that draft season and you don't ever really hear about again unless you watch preseason football. I'll be surprised if he bounces around from team to team as a backup. He just doesn't seem to have that skill set. Unfortunate, but it's the reality of the business of the NFL. Rams-Chargers. No backups or no starters for either of those teams in week 2. A lot of designed runs I noticed from the Chargers for the quarterback position. They had Easton Stick doing draw plays and bootlegs and a lot of mobile type of quarterback play and offensive plays. And I had to remind myself it is Jim Harbaugh. He had Alex Smith. He had Colin Kaepernick. Even J.J. McCarthy is pretty mobile. That's kind of his system, and he loves to run the ball. So it made me question, well, is Justin Herbert going to be a guy that can run these kind of plays? Like, what's going to happen in week 1 of the regular season and throughout when Jim has his starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Chargers back on the field, has the plantar fascia injury behind him? Is he going to be trying to run him the same way that he's run quarterbacks previously? Because Justin Herbert's mobile, but we don't know him as a runner. I think that's the difference. A mobile quarterback that can move in the pocket well, extend plays out to either sideline, but trying to get upfield as a runner with design plays. Maybe he was just doing that because that was his personnel. Who knows? But Herbert is much more comfortable being in a pocket, drop back passer or shotgun, and just dissecting the defense in a more classic kind of fashion and use his feet if he needs to. So that's definitely going to be interesting. I haven't really gotten the vibe that Jim Harbaugh likes Justin Herbert. I've seen from a lot of the coaching turnover we've seen in recent years, it seems more like these coaches come into these situations with these pretty good quarterbacks, pretty good guys that are already on the roster, and they've already made their minds up like, nah, that's not who I want. I like the team. I like the franchise. I like the city. I like the organization, but that's not my guy. The offensive-minded head coaches, they've already kind of set their minds, and they haven't, let their cards be seen, but it's felt. I don't sense that Justin Herbert is a Jim Harbaugh type of guy. I just don't get that vibe. And you heard it here first. I haven't seen that anywhere else. I haven't heard that in any other analysis. It might just be me, or maybe I just haven't been paying attention. But even though they gave him that deal, I think 2 years ago, I wouldn't be surprised if Justin Herbert is going to be moved, depending on how this season goes. Because they're definitely not trying to move Jim Harbaugh. They moved heaven and earth to get him there, and he fits everything about what they're trying to be and where they're trying to go. But Justin Herbert, because of his previous regimes, and he's done his part. He's gotten his yards, he's gotten his touchdowns, but because of the absence of the big wins, playoff appearances, playoff wins, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to move him, try to figure out what kind of compensation they can get, what money, what players, what picks, and just go a different direction. This next draft would be an interesting time to do it, being that they're in Los Angeles and they're always in the shadow of the Rams, especially after the Rams won the Super Bowl a couple years ago. Wouldn't be surprised if they try to go get a marquee name at quarterback like Shador or Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers or somebody that could inject some new life into the fan base and to the organization, being that they're in L.A. I don't know. Just a light observation. Kamani Vidal has gotten a lot of run in this preseason. I thought that was interesting, too. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins both come over from Baltimore. You call it a favor or whatever, from brother to brother, John Harbaugh to Jim Harbaugh. But I thought they were going to be the tandem that was locked in to start. Then they go and draft Kamani Vidal. But then they run Kamani Vidal as though he's not in contention to start. So J.K. Dobbins coming off of like his umpteenth injury. I think it was an Achilles last year. Gus Edwards has missed time previously with injury, but last year he was very good for the Ravens, very efficient as a runner, but nothing much outside of his running prowess, no utility in the pass game. So everybody was kind of looking at Kamani Vidal. It's like, okay, he won't probably start week one, but he'll about, late in October, November, he'll take over. And he's running well enough to do that in preseason. He's looked good enough to be that guy, but he's just had a lot of carries, which usually isn't indicative of a player that's going to start week one or start at some point for a franchise in the regular season. They'll get a couple of series or a couple of touches in the preseason, and then the coaches are like, okay, we know that's the guy we want to use, or we know that's the guy we want to replace person X. Let's go ahead and put him on ice before they get injured. He had 11 carries in this game, and then I think the previous game he had like 15. So, I don't know. It just doesn't strike me as a player that's going to be starting anytime soon, especially when you got two guys on paper ahead of you. We'll see how that turns out. Maybe he tries to rotate all three guys, Kamani being pass catcher, Gus Edwards being short distance, goal line kind of guy, and then J.K. maybe being first two downs. I don't know. I don't know how they work that out. Quinn Johnson, very similar to Malik Willis. I think he's done, man. He only had one target, and that was in the third quarter. Very similar to some of the other receivers I've mentioned since I've been in this recording session here. No separation, no explosiveness. I didn't really see it coming out of TCU last season, but I think it's apparent now. So for them to not have gone and got another receiver outside of Ladd McConkey, which we'll see how that pans out. I'll keep my opinion to myself. Very good receiver, but that's it. They must really be focused on the run game. Or they must know something about some of the other receivers on the roster that I don't know. But what we do know is that Quentin Johnston isn't that guy. And he's been struggling against second-team defenses, which just lets me know, they're going to go ahead and move on from him, especially, again, new regime that didn't draft him. They're not responsible. It's unfortunate, but he got the target in the third quarter from Luis Perez. Shout out to the XFL. He was the lone XFL champion for 2.0, or this recent era, these recent years, for the Arlington Renegades. And he's making his way back into the league. He's been a spring ball maven. He's been very successful in all the spring ball leagues he's been in, and now it's looking like he'll catch on with the franchise and, my opinion, pathway to some playing time. if Justin Herbert should struggle or stumble or get injured, or at least to just hang out as a backup and make a solid living with the ball cap on and a clipboard on the sidelines. Brendan Rice, also on the roster, he only got two targets with no catches. Also discouraging because it's Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son. Why is it that you bring him in or draft him if you don't believe he's going to contribute, and he's not contributing? So not much noise there. I didn't know Jason Taylor's son was in the league. Jason Taylor, the pass rusher, linebacker, defensive end for the Miami Dolphins back in the day, Hall of Fame in recent years. He's got a son that's in the league, and he plays defensive back for the Rams, or he's trying his hand. He did have some plays that he made, a pass breakup and a fumble recovery. Jason Taylor the second. So somebody to keep an eye on. He definitely flashed across my screen. I saw that name. Like that's although it's two common names, the name together, Jason Taylor, is a very unique name. And did the research, and yep, that was him. Bucks and the Jags. No starters for that game. I was impressed by what I saw from Bucky Irving. He had the run game looking night and day different from how it looked last year. They couldn't get any real push in the run. They kind of playing the run off of the pass. So the pass would be successful, and then they'd work draws and work counters and figure out other ways to get Rachaad White up the field, because it just the line, I don't know if it was the line or the concepts, I don't know. They just couldn't get the run game going. Bucky Irvin had that run game going. As a smaller guy coming out of Oregon and their system that they've had for the past 15, 20 years, I didn't expect him to be as physical of a runner as he was. You know, he's getting downhill, lowering his shoulders. He's got a good forward lean, running between the tackles, and he's moving a pile. 4, 5, 6, 7 yard runs that were very impressive. And he only had 6 carries, but it was surprisingly physical and effective runs, efficient runs, where he's getting good yards per carry. So I think at the very least he'll work in tandem with Rachaad White, and he definitely will push for a starting role. A lot of people have been high on him for that reason. Rachaad White still has a lot of utility out of the backfield, so I don't think they'll fade him out completely. But if Bucky decides he just wants to be a phenomenal player, then I'm sure they'll switch that depth chart around very quickly. KJ Britt, he's continuing to make his case for that starting inside linebacker position across or alongside Levante David, replacing Devin White, who went to Philadelphia. Britt had 6 tackles in week 2, 5 solo tackles, and undrafted free agent from Florida State, Kalen DeLoach, he had 5 tackles with 3 solos. He's also competing for that open spot. Both of them showing good range and decisiveness, moving in that 3-4 scheme. They really need some help on the edge. They were like top 10 or top 5 in sacks as a team defense, but they didn't have any guys get like double-digit sacks individually. So it's definitely been a collective team effort, but they don't want to have to depend on the unit as a whole. They would like, as any team, to have at least one guy who can go get it by himself and really be disruptive by himself, so the scheme can open up a little bit more. I'm sure that's what Ty Bowles wants for that defense. Mac Jones started for the Jaguars. He showed why he was a first-round pick and why he was a Pro Bowler to me. He had a very poised performance. He was 16 to 23, 210 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And again, backup competition. But again, as I said in the previous session for this episode, if you've got a great player and that great player is playing against subpar competition, then that great player should dominate that subpar competition. That's the expectation. It shouldn't be, he's struggling or he's figuring it out. Like, well, then is he really great? Because a great player is going to be great regardless of where he's at. So it was good to see him do that. And somehow he had 6 rushing attempts. I don't know if that was him getting pressured or sacked, or I know there were no design runs that I saw in the game. But he definitely had a good game, very efficient, and he looked like he was very decisive, like he hadn't lost his confidence, unlike some other quarterbacks that I mentioned earlier in this episode. The Jaguars also signed Breeland Speaks from the UFL. He played for the Michigan Panthers, led the league, the spring league, in sacks before they ended up flaming out in the playoffs. And he ended up getting a sack for the Jaguars. So he's acclimating well in camp and fighting for a roster spot. They've definitely got some good edge rushers there, and Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines Allen, JHA. So we'll see if he makes the final 53 and contributes to that rotation. I think that would be a good addition if he can acclimate to this level of play from the spring ball level of play. Touch on three more games, and then I'll get out of here because they're trying to get me out of here as well. We got the Cowboys and the Raiders. As everybody's heard, Gardner Minshew has been named the starter for the Raiders in the upcoming season. I think it was decided in this game, week 2 against the Cowboys. He wasn't really pulling the trigger. He was kind of playing it safe in hindsight. He only had one big play to Trey Tucker. It's like a 48-yard bomb on a drive that didn't end with a touchdown. Other than that, he didn't really push the ball down the field or take any tremendous risks. Granted, Devontae Adams hasn't been out there in these preseason games to make a difference, but the passes he was throwing, they were high, they were outside, and yet it was enough. So again, it must have been the stuff in the scripted practices and the joint practices that we couldn't necessarily see in full. Meanwhile, what I really think made the decision was Aiden O'Connell threw a pick 6 to end his time playing in the preseason. He had a really good game, was making a lot of good decisions, had 2 good drives, moving the ball down the field, and had a touchdown on one of the drives, but his last throw was a pick 6. And I just think that was the nail in the coffin for his efforts to be the starter to start the season. Trey Tucker has been much, much more involved. They've been raving about him coming into camp, and he's been proving that worth with his return ability and with his big play ability in the offense. Quiet as kept. Everyone's talked about Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, but Trey Tucker could be a very key component in that receiving attack or that aerial attack for the Raiders if they can develop the appropriate rapport with Gardner Minshew. So it's going to come down to that quarterback play. I haven't been liking what I've seen from the Raiders defense. Very porous against the run. Even with Crosby and Christian Wilkins starting, they've not been able to stop the run in either week. And last night was no better in their preseason game against the 49ers, even though none of the starters played. They were letting Deuce Vaughn get off, who's like 5'6". He's shorter than me, and he's probably much bigger than me, but he was like very physical in running the ball through our defense, our starting defense. So I've tempered my expectations for the season, especially after seeing that. Trey Lance was doing well too. He had 7 rushes, so he was taking advantage of what we were giving him. And, Brandon Aubrey for the Cowboys. He had a 66-yard field goal that matched the league record, even though it's preseason, so it doesn't count in the record books. But nevertheless, he showed his ability with that kick. Had 2 other games here, the Packers and the Broncos. Not going to be able to get to those because of time, as I'm working on mindfulness of time and efficiency with my wrap-ups and reviews. Also wanted to touch on some injuries, some contracts, but we'll get to that stuff as the season goes on. Again, this is me getting reps, getting familiar with settings, environments, schedule, other responsibilities, etc. So we'll figure out a way to get it more condensed and more entertaining and more informational for you. I'm going to start adding graphics and video in so that it's not just you looking at me talking, although, I think I'm pretty handsome, you know what I'm saying? Even though I got the fading up in the corners, I'm doing okay. But, that's not the current climate of podcast entertainment as I know. So we're just going to keep working on getting better week after week, month after month, throughout the course of the season, and make this product as A1 as possible. So if you've listened this long, I thank you again for checking in. I thank you for your time, your effort. If you liked what you've heard and seen thus far, please feel free to leave me a like, a comment. You can subscribe to the podcast at Brennon on YouTube. We have an Instagram page at 2 Deep Coverage, the number 2 Deep Coverage. And we also have an email address that you can send any other feedback to 2deepcoverage@gmail.com. So thank you again for your time. Please share this with other people if you find it informational or entertaining. And I look forward to talking to y'all next week, wrapping up the preseason. Peace.